On today's lesson, we are actually going to be starting to divide with decimals, and the decimal places are going to be in the divisor. So the divisor, as we remember, is the number that we are dividing by, and it's going to be outside the division house. So let's go and cover our order of dividing. We'll cover divisor and dividend one more time, and then we'll start on some examples. So the order of dividing is D, M, S, B, R. We can remember it as does McDonald's sell burgers regularly? So, with that in mind, D stands for divide, M, multiply, S, subtract, B, bring down, and R, repeat. So we are going to do those steps when we are dividing today. Now, the two rules that we need to remember about dividing include the divisor and the dividend. So the divisor is the number that we divide by, and it's the number that stays outside the house. The dividend is the number that is being divided by, and it goes inside the house. And I'm going to color code it red and blue. Remember that when we are reading a division problem, the first number goes inside the division house. So that first number goes inside the division house. So I have a few examples here, and we are going to first set up the problems, move over any decimal places that we might need to move, and then we're going to solve. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write out the division problems. So I have 250 divided by 0.5 or 50 hundredths or 5 tenths. So let me go ahead and write this as a division problem. 250 is my dividend, so that's the number that's going to go inside the house. While 0.5 is my divisor, and that's the number that's going to go outside the house. So what I need to do first, because we don't like to divide by decimals, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a decimal after 250, because 250 is a whole number, which means that there is a decimal point at the end. It's just invisible. You can't always see it. The next thing I'm going to do is, since we do not divide by decimals, we have to change this decimal into a whole number. To do that, we need to move the decimal to the right. When I do that, I moved it one space and 0.5 became 5. So what I do to the outside of the division problem, I also have to do the inside, which means that I'm going to add on another 0 onto this number. So because I don't like the way that looks and I want to be as clean and careful as possible, I'm going to rewrite my division problem. So my new division problem is going to be 5, and it's going to be the divisor, and inside the house is going to be now 2,500. And I'm not going to forget that decimal at the end, just in case I might use it again. So the next thing I'm going to do before I start dividing is I'm going to write a line over each part of the dividend, because I should have a number in each part of that dividend. And now I can start to divide. 5 cannot go into 2, so there's a 0 above that 2, and I multiply it out. 5 times 0 is 0. The next step is to subtract. So 2 minus 0 is 2. Then I need to bring down the next number in line, which is a 5. And now I have 25. 5, or 25, sorry, divided by 5 is actually 5. Because 5 times 5 is 25. I do the next step, which is subtracting, and I get a 0. Then I bring down the next number, which is a 0. And even though there's nothing that goes 5 into 0 except for 0, I still have to fill in these blanks up at the top to make sure that I'm done fully dividing the number. So 5 goes into 0 0 times. I subtract. I still get 0, but I have to do one more try. Again, 5 is still going into 0 0 times. So 5 times 0 is 0. I subtract. I get 0. So my answer is actually going to be 500. So 250 divided by 0.5 is going to be 500. So let's go ahead and we are going to try the next problem. Same process. I'm going to write out my numbers. This one is 309. So I'm going to write 309 inside the house because that is the dividend. And the divisor is 0.03. Now, before I move the decimals over, I have to put the decimal point on the dividend so I know how many places I'm going to move it. So here we go. Let's move the decimal. I'm going to move this decimal point over 1, 2 times. And what I do to the divisor, I also have to do to the dividend. So I'm going to move it 1, 2 times. And I get zeros in place. So there we go. I have all this information. Now let's rewrite the problem and then actually get to solving. So now instead of doing 309 divided by 300ths, I am going to be doing my new divisor is 3 and my new dividend is 30,900. Now I can start to divide. So I'm going to write my lines above my dividend. I'm also going to include the decimal point just in case. I don't know if I'm going to need it yet, but just in case. And I'm going to start dividing. 3 goes into 3 one time because 1 times 3 gives me 3. I need to subtract. I end up with 0, and I have to bring down my next 0. Well, we already know that 3 times 0 gives me 0. So this next number is 0. So I subtract 0 because 3 times 0 is 0. And I'm left with 0. So I got to bring down my next number. I have the number 9. 3 times 3 gives me 9. So 3 times 3 is 9. I write 9 down below. I subtract and I get 0. I can't stop though because I still have 2 more spaces I got to fill. Even though they're zeros, I still have to fill up the spaces. So 3 times 0 we already know is 0. I got to do it one more time and subtract. And then 3 times 0 again is 0. I subtract. Still have a remainder of 0. And I am done. So my answer to 309 divided by 0.03 is actually going to be 10,300. Okay, we have one more problem to go. Once we get this done, we are set for the day. So let's do the last problem together. So the last problem says 448 divided by 1.4. So 448 divided by 1.4. So what we are going to do is we are going to move the decimal first and then rewrite the problem and solve. So I'm going to move this decimal, but first, before I do that, I have to add the decimal to the end of the dividend just so that I know where I'm moving it to. I got to move this decimal over one space, which means I'm going to move this one over one space, which means I add a 0. So let me rewrite the problem. I'm going to have 14, and I am going to divide it into 4,480. Remember, before I start dividing, I have to place my lines above my number. And now I can go ahead and start. Well, 14 cannot go into the number 4 because 14 is a 2-digit number. So that's a 0. I'm going to subtract 0 because 14 times 0 is 0. I bring down my 4 and then I go and bring down my next number. So now I have the number 44. Well, we've been using this number quite a lot, so I should know that 14 times 3 is going to give me 42. Now that I know that, 44 minus 42 is 2, and I bring down the 8. So 14 goes into 28 2 times. So 2 times 14 is 28. I'm going to go ahead and subtract it. Bring this last 0 down because I still got to deal with that 0. And I know that 0 times 14 gives me 0. I subtract. I'm left with a remainder of 0, which means my answer to 448 divided by 1.4 is going to equal 320. So it's now your job to go and try your exit slip.